Hello, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday.
Hey.
We're going to do a little bit of review, a little bit of math, and a little bit of vocabulary tonight. Then we're going to start over next week from chapter 1 again. So we begin the entire book again. Anybody has any special chapters they want to do, just please let me know. I sent out some tests for people tonight and some videos. I'll send out some more. If anybody wants anything specific, please let me know. I'll get it out. People who are looking to get signed out, I think somebody tried to email or get in touch with my wife. She'll work with you to get you signed out. Remember, you only have a year from the time I sign you out to pass your test, get your fingerprints and get licensed. Somebody called me today from another school, and it was more than a year ago that they got signed out, and they went to schedule their test today, and they were told you're too late. It's only a year, so apparently they're not giving extensions anymore. And now that person has to take the class again. And I guess their school, the school they took the classes in, never told them. So shame on them for not making it very clear that you do have a year from the day I sign you out to pass your test, get fingerprinted, and hang your license. So we certainly don't want anybody to make that mistake if they can help it. I'm pulling
Going Friday.
Say that again.
Going Friday, testing Friday.
All right, good. So we'll kind of talk about a couple of the questions that might come on the test as we go through it. And best of luck.
Thank you.
Yes, good luck to you too.
Thank you. Yeah.
Me also, I'm going Friday.
So it should be a good day, right? You guys should both pass.
Are you going Friday also?
Yes, yes.
Oh, good luck. Okay, great. Yeah.
Good luck to both
This
of
is
us.
my
Thank
first
you.
one, so,
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope so. I hope we can make it.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll check in next week.
Yep, you guys will let us know next week, or you guys will call me straight from the test center.
Sure. Yeah, just told me I would, yes.
And
Yeah.
between now and Friday, if you're studying and you have a question, just get in touch with me so I can answer it.
All
Don't
right,
let a
thank
question
you.
go unanswered until the test time. So we don't have everybody signed in, so we're going to get started. And we probably will be a little jumpy at first as we sign people in as they come in. Again, everybody has jobs and their time is very precious. So I know it's hard sometimes to make the start of class. I don't mind. I'll sign you in. It just for a second there, I lose my concentration, but no big deal. Everything could make me lose my concentration at this age. So not a problem.
Yes,
all right.
Thank you. Actually, thank you for tonight. They say that math and also you're gonna give us all the information about.
Yep. Again, if we only have about 7 or 8 math questions tonight to go over, if you want to try some more math questions tomorrow night, you know what, I will set up tomorrow night a math review class for just a short class. So we'll schedule that for tomorrow night also,
Okay.
a short math review class, especially since you guys are just going for the test. All right, so first of all, we're going to review some documents and forms and
Thank
some
you.
terms. We want to start out with recording. Recording is accomplished at the county clerk's office, and recording is a method by which there's a system where all the documents that have anything to do with real estate can be stored so that anybody can have the opportunity to go and to check them out. And what that does is it serves to construct a knowledge base. And so we call it constructive notice or constructive knowledge. And how do you get constructive notice or constructive knowledge is by recording. So recording serves as constructive notice. In order to record something, the document that you are recording must be acknowledged. And that's because the documents you recorded have to be signed. And how does a county clerk know that it was truly you that signed the document? Excuse me, one second. Excuse me. How do they know that it was you that signed the document? Well, you swear that it was you, and then an officer of the court, which is an attorney, the county clerk, or a notary says, yep, that was Bruce Parker. He sufficiently identified himself to me and I am taking his acknowledgement. And then recording fees must be paid. And where do we record things? At the county clerk's office. Who can go into the county clerk's office and check things out? Anybody. When you do a title search, the people doing the title search are checking things out at the county clerk's office. That's where we would see liens recorded and mortgages recorded and deeds recorded. And again, it's just a place where all that knowledge is available for anybody who wants to know about it to go and visit and to look up what they need to look up. So we're constructing a mechanism for you to have the ability to look things up. All right, come on, guys, here. Let's change screens. So deeds. New Jersey is an allodial state, which means we transfer real property by deed. We also transfer personal property by bill of sale. So real property by deed, personal property by bill of sale. A deed is a written instrument. There's a specific format that it needs to be created in. It has to have a legal capacity of the grantor. The grantor is the seller or the person who has the rights now. They have to be 18, sane, and sober. And tonight on the TV, all they're talking about is Britney Spears trying to have her guardianship removed because she wasn't considered a competent person. So she couldn't sell any real estate because she's not a competent grantor. A named grantee. So on a deed, the person who was getting the property, the buyer or the person who was getting the right or interest only needs to be named. That means they don't sign it. They only are named. It has to have a recital of consideration, how much the property is changing hands for. The recital of consideration in a gift deed, where there's no money changing hands, is for love and affection. There needs to be words of conveyance, some verb that indicates your desire for the grantor to give or sell that interest in real estate to the grantee. A Hubendum Clause, and for some reason, this is always on the test. Where do you find a Hubendum Clause? You find it in a deed, and the Hubendum Clause speaks to how much of an estate you have. Do you have fee simple? Do you have life estate? Do you have defeasible fee estate? Any exceptions or reservations you would put into the deed. If you're putting a deed restriction or a reservation, it's where it would go. We had a question from Jeffrey. He wanted to know if he can go to the county clerk's office and ask for a list of tax liens. So here's that's a longer answer than you would expect. And I'm working on just that, on a project on that now. The answer is no, but you can get a property and find out if there is a tax lien on it. So the investigation would take you forever because you'd have to look up every single property one by one. Now, some towns do provide a mechanism for finding out which properties had tax liens placed on them the last year, the last 2 years, the last 3 years. Forgive me, I forget whether it's Monmouth or Middlesex that's easier to work in this, but what you'd have to do is you would have to you'd have to kind of discover what the docket number is on these tax liens, and then you would run a search for tax liens within a certain period, and you might be able to then get all the list of all the tax liens in a certain area. You can also get the newspaper or get the list from your municipal tax collector when they're having the tax lien sale. I have a guy who works in my office who's working on writing a program now that will do a search and extract the tax lien information automatically. But he's having a tough time because there's not a real consistency in the way the documents on these tax lien certificates is written. So his program that he's written is having a rough time. As I get it, as we get it down and it works perfectly, if you remind me, I'll let you know. But that's the long answer for your question. Can you get a list? Maybe, maybe not. And it's not as easy as it seems. But you could look at any specific property and see if there's a tax lien against it. That's easy. It's just going property by property by property. That's crazy. Okay. Let's get some more people in here. So in a deed, any exceptions or reservations go in the deed. Any warranties or covenants go in the deed, depending on what kind of a deed it is. Remember, the biggest question on the test sometimes about deeds is what kind of a deed does not have a covenant of season. And the deed that does not have a covenant of season is a quitclaim deed. And a quitclaim deed is where the grantor is not even saying they're the owner of the property. They're just promising they will never bring a claim. They're quitting their claim. So a quitclaim deed does not have a covenant of season. Then in the deed, we have a legal description. Remember, a legal description is a metes and bounds description. And the grantor signs the deed. So the grantor signs the deed. And when you're having your acknowledgement and your recording, it's acknowledging the grantor's signature. A deed has to have voluntary delivery and acceptance in the here and now. Its deed is recorded to protect the grantee, and therefore the grantee pays for the recording of the new deed. And that would be a debit to the grantee on the closing statement. Again, a deed should be acknowledged, must be acknowledged to be recorded, and it protects the grantee to record it. Contracts.
Bruce?
Yes,
Can I bother you with one question?
sure.
On the contract, they usually put grantor, grantee, or vendor, vendee.
So on a contract, it's vendor, vendee, right? On that
Yes.
document, on a contract, it's vendor, vendee, or seller and buyer. On a deed, it's grantor, grantee. So we have different names depending what document it is.
Thank you.
Okay. Contracts. We're going to have the essential elements of a contract. You have to have an agreement. You have to have an offer and acceptance, otherwise known as a meeting of the minds. Contract has to be supported by consideration. Something of value has to change hands. There have to be competent parties, 18 sane and sober, competent parties with reality of consent and free of duress. Reality of consent means you both are agreeing to the same thing, and duress means nobody's pointing a gun at your head. A contract must be for a legal purpose, and contracts for real estate are governed by the statute of frauds. Contracts can be unilateral, and uni meaning one, only one party can be forced to perform, and that would be an option contract. In an option contract, only the seller can be forced to perform. The buyer performs at his option. In order to have a valid option contract, you must have an agreed to price, an option consideration, some amount of money that the buyer gives the seller to keep open the offer, and a time frame. So a price, option consideration, and a time frame. Another kind of contract is a bilateral contract, buy for two. In a bilateral contract, two parties have the obligation to do what they promised and have the expectation of getting what was due them in the contract. A normal real estate contract is a bilateral contract. Contracts can be valid. That means they have all the essential elements that would allow them to be enforced in court. A void contract is a contract that is for an illegal purpose and has no legal standing. And it's actually an oxymoron, because if you have a void contract, it means you don't have any contract. A contract may be voidable, which means one of the parties can say we don't have a contract. That's a voidable contract. A contract could be unenforceable. That's where one party may not be able to force the other party to do what they promised. So voidable and unenforceable are kind of inverse images of each other. And then a contract can be executed. That means everything is done in the contract. Everybody did what they promised. Or a contract can be executory, which means you've got an agreement, but you still have plenty of things to do. So executed and executory are also important because we earn our commission on an executory contract. When we have a meeting of the minds, we've earned our commission, but we don't get paid until it's an executed contract. We don't get paid until closing. And that's what our termination agreement deals with. What might happen if we quit after we get something under contract, but before it closes? How much are we going to get paid? When we talk about listings, we have several different kinds of listings. And remember, a listing is a bilateral express contingent contract. bilateral because both the seller and the real estate broker have obligations and expectations. Express because everything is written down, and contingent because the broker doesn't get paid unless they sell the house. So what kind of listings do we have? An exclusive right to sell. That's the kind the broker likes the best because no matter who sells it, the listing broker is going to get paid no matter who sells. That's the kind I like the best. We could have a waiver of broker cooperation with the listing. And the waiver of broker cooperation means that the seller has instructed the broker not to put it into the MLS. And that means that nobody but the broker's office will know that it's for sale. And that comes about only if the seller signs a waiver of broker cooperation. An exclusive agency listing is the type of a listing where a real estate broker lists the property for sale, but he gives the seller the right to sell it himself without paying a commission. So if Remax lists a property for sale and Weichert sells it, we still get paid our commission. If Remax lists a property for sale with an exclusive agency listing and the seller finds his own buyer, there's no commission. An open listing is a listing that's given to many real estate brokers at the same time, and whoever finds the buyer gets all the commission. Also, in an open listing, if the seller finds their own buyer without the help of a real estate broker, then the seller doesn't have to pay any commission. The next kind of a listing is a net listing, and a net listing is illegal in New Jersey. A net listing is where the seller says, sell my house and anything you get above $100,000, you can keep. So if you get $110,000, your commission is 10. If you get $120,000, your commission is 20. That's illegal in New Jersey. In New Jersey, we also have an oral listing. A change to the statute of frauds makes oral listings enforceable. They used to not be, but they are now. Listings must have an expiration date. So whenever you take a listing, it must say when it expires. It must state what the commission is. It must state the terms of sale that are acceptable, like what type of financing, FHA, cash, conventional. It must name the parties. The parties are, by the way, on a listing, the broker and the sellers. A description of the property and just an address is sufficient for a listing. And every time a seller signs a listing agreement, he must be given an attorney general's memorandum against discrimination. Also on the listing, there must be a statement that says all commissions are negotiable, and commissions are negotiable between the seller and the broker. Now, the broker is going to send you out to a listing appointment, and you are going to be negotiating on behalf of the broker because you're going to be a subagent of the broker under your employment agreement. And so when you're negotiating with the seller, you're really negotiating for the commission rate on behalf of your broker. And your broker has whatever he chooses to do in terms of commission, he has the right to do. Mortgages. In New Jersey, a mortgage must be in writing. The parties to the mortgage must have the legal capacity to sign contracts. That means 18 sane and sober. And there must be a mortgageable estate. A mortgage also has a legal description. So a meets and bounds description must be attached to a mortgage. There must be a mortgaging clause. And a mortgaging clause is just the verb that indicates your desire to mortgage the house. It could be mortgages. It could be secures because you're securing the loan. It could be hypothecates because you're hypothecating the house as an asset for a debt, or it could be pledge or any other verb that has that same definition. So there must be a mortgaging clause. There must be a statement of the debt. How much are you borrowing? Because remember, the purpose of a mortgage is to allow the lender to take the house away from you if you don't pay them. You must have a mortgageable estate. That means you cannot give the bank a mortgage on a lease. It can only be on a property you own. And there needs to be foreclosure provisions. In New Jersey, we are a judicial foreclosure state, and we are a strict foreclosure state. We foreclose under the Fair Foreclosure Act in New Jersey. And a mortgage is a voluntary lien. So there must be voluntary delivery and acceptance. A mortgage is a voluntary specific lien. So a lien that you're doing of your own free will, and it's against only the one property. It must be recorded to serve as a lien. So in order to be recorded, it has to have an acknowledgement and then pay the recording fees, and then it can be re-recorded. What are some mortgage clauses that often show up? We have an acceleration clause. And the acceleration clause says, if you screw up, instead of having 30 years to pay them back, you got to pay them back now. So it speeds up how quickly it has to be paid off. And it's not only for if you screw up, because some loans also have a due on sale clause, which means you must pay off the mortgage if you sell it, or a alienation clause, which means if it changes ownership, you have to pay off the mortgage. So a due on sale clause or an alienation clause. Loans that do not have due on sale clauses are called assumable mortgages. And we know that all FHA loans are assumable and all VA loans are assumable. A mortgage also must have a defeasance clause. The defeasance clause states that once you pay off the mortgage, the lender no longer has the ability to take your house away from you. So a defeasance clause. Sometimes you can have a subordination clause in a mortgage. And a subordination clause is where two lenders agree to swap priority. So the first mortgage agrees to act as if it's the second, and the second mortgage agrees to be in first position. That's subordination. We also have a covenant to pay taxes if your taxes are not included in your mortgage. And if you don't pay your taxes and a tax lien is created, it would cause your loan to accelerate and the bank would start foreclosure. So you have a covenant to pay taxes. You have a covenant to keep your property insured. So you have an insurance promise in your mortgage. And again, if you have the ability to pay your insurance directly and not have it paid out of your monthly payments, if you don't pay for your insurance and it gets canceled, the lender will accelerate your loan and they will buy what's called a forced insurance policy. You also have a good repair clause. You promise to keep the property in good repair because after all, the lender has a much bigger stake in the property than you do. And that comes under your obligation not to waste. You also can have a release clause. And where do we see a release clause? In a blanket mortgage. So a builder is building 20 houses. He has one lien for the construction against all 20. As he finishes house number 1, the release clause allows the blanket to be lifted and that one house to come out from under the lien and be sold while the other 19 still stay under the blanket. That's a blanket mortgage and it has a release clause. When we talk about leases, we have essential elements in a lease. We need the date of the lease, but we don't absolutely have to have the date because we can have a lease that's created by performance. You could hand the keys to somebody and they hand you the rent and you've created a lease. It's a much better idea to have a written lease with the date on it. People signing a lease must be 18 sane and sober, have the contractual ability to sign. And also, if you're signing for the landlord, you've got to either be the landlord's power of attorney agent or you've got to be the landlord. So you have to have the contractual ability to sign a lease on behalf of the ownership or of the landlord. A lease has mutual agreement supported by consideration, just like any other contract. The mutual agreement is your period of your time in your lease. The consideration is the lease amount for the right of possession. And you need to have a description of the property, potentially the uses that are permitted on the property. A lease has to be for a legal purpose. So if you're going to sign a lease to sell marijuana for right now in New Jersey, that lease is not valid because selling marijuana is not a legal purpose in New Jersey right now. And you could have signatures on a lease. That's the best way, or it can be created by performance. You hand somebody the keys, they hand you the money. Non-essential elements of a lease. Recording. You don't need to record a lease. A recording of a lease does protect the lessee. in the event of a refinance and a subsequent lien holder who then would be in a lower position. But especially in residential leases, that's not that important. Property managers agreements. The very first thing in your property manager's agreement is going to be the owner of the property appointing you as their agent and spelling out your fiduciary duties. And then you'll have something in the agreement for the work to be performed, the compensation. Typically, you're paid a percentage of gross collected rent. Any reporting requirements you might have in terms of maybe condition reports or income statements. The full authority of the manager. Does the manager have the ability to get repairs done, or does he have to have permission of the owner? A property management agreement, just like a listing, must have a expiration period, a time period. You might have to have some advance and emergency authorities. What if you have a water main break in the property? Are you allowed to go ahead and get it fixed, or do you have to wait for permission from the landlord? A survey is how we create our meets and bounds definition. It's done by a surveyor. Meets and bounds means distance and direction. We can have benchmarks and we can have monuments. Benchmarks are always man-made. Monuments can be man-made or natural. We have a datum, which is a relative point of elevation. And we have encroachments. That's when your physicality, your fence or your building is on someone else's property, or someone else's building or fence is on your property. That creates an encroachment, and that's found in a survey. Surveys have a point of beginning and a point of ending, and they describe the perimeter of a property by distance and direction. And there is a written statement at the end, and that counts as your narrative survey. In terms of the hierarchy of what best legally defines where your property is, a narrative survey is the top. Next is the lot and block description, and that comes for the town to know where to charge your taxes to. And also, if you have a condo, it has a reference to the unit deed in a condo. But remember, the master deed in a condo refers to the meets and bounds definition. And then the least descriptive is the street address. The street address is just where the post office delivers your mail. And you can change that easily. Before you begin work, you must sign an employment agreement. The essential elements of your employment agreement are the compensation, a promise to pay you within 10 days of you bring in a commission check, your broker's got to pay you within 10 days, a termination agreement, what happens if you get a contract signed and then you quit before it closes, how much are you going to get paid? And lastly, an agreement that anything that's in writing in your employment agreement takes priority over anything that's verbal. Now, there can be a million other things in there, but these are the 4 things that have to be in there in the employment agreement. And you must sign the employment agreement before you begin work. All right, so how do you get your license? You're going to go your 75-hour class. You only have to be here for 80% of that, and we give you very liberal credit for the 6 o'clock to 9:30. You want to demonstrate your proficiency to get signed out, and we do that by sending you our class test, and you're going to take it and grade it yourself. And like I said, I sent out a bunch of them tonight. You're going to schedule your state test with PSI. A couple of you guys have had experience with that. PSI has multiple locations, the closest one being North Brunswick. We're going to pass the state test. Then you're going to get fingerprinted at Identigo. There's locations all over the state. And when you have your pass certificate and your receipt from Identigo, you're going to bring that to the broker that you're going to work for, and you're going to pay $160. And when I wrote this slide up, it was taking 2 weeks to get activated. The Real Estate Commission is back in action again, and they are activating people in 2 days now. So you pass your test and get fingerprinted, you can be working in 2 days. My phone number is 908-202-5738. I answer text better than I answer the phone. And my voicemail is always full, because if I didn't leave it full, people would leave messages all day long. So it's always full. Text is best. Phone is next. Here's Lee's phone number, 732-266-3366. We still are kind of limited because the only computer that we have that is registered that works for signing people out is in the office, and Lee doesn't go into the office every day. So you've got to give her a text or a call when you want to sign out, and she'll sign you out as quickly as she can, sometimes the next day. But Tuesdays is her big day for signing people out. You can stay in the class as long as you want. If you don't pass the test, you can stay in the class forever if you choose until you pass. Once I sign you out, though, you have 1 year to pass your test, get fingerprinted, and hang your license. And you're able to drop out for a while and then drop back in. Again, just remember, you have 1 year from when I sign you out. So don't let that year go by, because all of this information falls out of your head. Let's see, I got a question here. Yeah, this video we'll get to. Again, it won't be tonight because it takes time to process it and then to edit it and put it into YouTube. But we'll get to it. Couple of math questions. Property is 3 acres and it's 500 feet deep. How wide is it? So what we're going to do is take 3, and you have to remember that magic number for how many square feet is in an acre. And we have 43,560 square feet in an acre. And remember, the guy from class said 711. So we're going to do 43,560 times 3. And then we're going to divide that by 500, because it's base times height for a rectangle. And that's going to give us 261.36 feet. 261.36 feet. Your answer on your test will always come up to a round number. They're never going to require you to round off on the real test. It always comes up to an exact number. So that's a really easy question. And it also depends on you remembering how many square feet is in an acre, 43,560. Another question they like to ask is about the conversion from square feet to square yards. And the reason is we order roofing materials by the square yard, we order flooring by the square yard, we order carpeting by the square yard. And so you may from time to time need to know how to convert. So we have a room that's 18 by 18, a room that is 18 by 18. So we're going to do 18 times 18. That's 324 square feet. Now, how do we convert square feet to square yards? Well, we divide by 3 times 3, because there's 3 feet in a yard and we're going to the second power. So 3 times 3 is 9. So we would divide our 324 divided by 9, and that's going to give us 36 square yards. So we have 36 square yards. Another way to do that, by the way, is convert the 18 feet to yards right from the beginning. And if you convert the 18 feet to yards, a yard is 3 feet. So 18 feet is 6 yards. The other 18 feet is 6 yards. And 6 times 6 is 36. So you still have the same number, 36 square yards. In real life, get used to people trying to cheat you, because Kmart sells carpet by the square foot because it looks so much cheaper than if they sell it by the square yard. So Kmart, that's the reason they sell it by the square foot. Somebody, so I got Ahmed sent me a message that this question was on the test or something similar. All right, a house is listed at $300,000. The price is reduced by 5%. What's the new sales price that it sells at? So $300,000, 2 ways we can do this. We can take $300,000 and we can multiply it by 5%, which is 0.05. That was 15,000. That means we reduce the price by 15,000. So what did it sell for? 300. minus 15,000 or 285,000.
Yes.
There's another way to do it, and that's to take 300,000 and multiply it by 95. And that gives us the same $285,000. Okay, because if you multiply it by 95, you're right, you're short by 5%.
Okay, nice.
Okay, so math question came in the test for the transfer fee. City charges $1 for each $1,000 and the state charges $150 for each 500. If a buyer puts down 50%, how much does the seller pay for a home sold for 400,000? So first of all, the 50% has nothing to do with it because you don't pay on loan or down payment, you pay on the purchase price. So we're going to pay $1 for each 1,000. So that's going to be there's going to be 400 1,000s. So you're going to pay $400 for the city, and then $1.50 per 500, which by the way is the same as $3 per 1,000. So you're going to pay $3 times 400, or let's write this stuff down because it's hard for me to keep track of it. Okay, so $1 for each 1,000. So we're selling it for 400,000. So how many thousands do we have? We have 400 times $1. It's 400. $400. And then we have $1.50 for each 500. Let's make our life easier. And let's just do something logical and say if it's $1.50 for each 500, it's now $3 for each 1,000. And again, we sold for 400,000. So we've got 400 thousands. So 400 now times $3 is $1,200. So we've got 1,200 plus 400. We're paying $1,600. Okay. Option they gave 2,000, 4,000, 6,000, and 8,000. Let's review it again. $1 for each 1,000, and we have 400 thousands. That's $400, and $3 for each 1,000. So we have 400 times 3 is 1,200. So something's wrong here because those aren't the answers. The answer is 1,600. The only thing I can think of is it's not.
Maybe it's not $1. Maybe it's like 100.
No, because then it would be 4,000. It would be $5,200.
You're missing part of the question.
Well, so anyway, let's forget about the answers for now. But that would be how we would do it. And you know, we can't go much further than that except to speculate. So
It wouldn't round up that high, would it?
no. It never rounds up on the state test. Never. All right. A commission check is for $15,000. Your rate of commission was 5%. How much did the house sell for? And that's one of these questions where we're going to use the same old magic circle with earnings, principal, and rate, with a multiplication sign there and a division sign there. And so what we're looking for is the price. What did the house sell for? And it's the earnings, which is 15,000 divided by the rate, which is 0.05. And 15,000 divided by 0.05 is 300,000. So the house sold for 300,000.
Yay.
Okay, really not too hard.
Oh, I wind up using my real estate method of math and now in my everyday job because I, calculate our percentages.
Sure. So I'm still trying to figure out the question that we got from Ahmed. City charges $1 for each 1,000. State charges $150 for each 500. So that's $3 per 1,000. there's no way we even come close to any of those answers because we came up with 1,600, 1,200 plus 400. So I have no idea. Commission check is for $8,000, 2.5% to the listing side, 2.5% to the side that represents the buyer. If you are on a 60-40 split, the first number is always the agent's number. The second number is always the broker's number. So you have $8,000 to your listing side. So you're going to have $8,000 to your listing side, and you can clearly see that they're even. So that must mean that $4,000 was the listing commission, and your 60% of $4,000, 60% of $4,000 is $2,400 to you. Vanessa asked if they let you use a calculator on the test. You can bring a simple calculator in, can't bring your phone in, but they do have a calculator built in to the computer, just like you do on your computer, and you can use that calculator.
They usually give you one also.
Okay, good. And they give you one also. Yeah, because a lot of people complain about using the one on the computer. All right, this one is usually on the test because we order sidewalks or dirt, and I just bought dirt because I just seeded a lawn. And by the way, I mismeasured and miscalculated. That cost me an extra $100. That cost me an extra charge because I had to have 2 deliveries because I miscalculated. So a sidewalk is 50 feet long, 6 inches deep, and 3 feet wide. How much concrete is needed? Remembering concrete comes by the cubic yard. So here we've got 3 different dimensions. And I would suggest the best way to do this is first go everything by feet. So we've got 50 feet, 6 inches is a half of a foot. So times 0.5 times 3. So 50 times 3 is 150 times 0.5 is 75 feet to the third power. And the conversion factor is 3 because it's to the third power. 3 times 3 times 3 or 9. I'm sorry, 3 times 3 times 3 or 27. 3 times 3 times 3 or 27. So we just divide 75 by 27, and that tells us how many cubic yards we need. So 75 divided by 27 is equal to 2.77 cubic yards. So let me tell you what I had. I had a piece of property in the backyard of a house I'm flipping. The grass was 1,200 square feet where there was no grass. And then I was going to put in topsoil 6 inches deep because that's what it said to do, 6 inches deep. So I took my 1,200 and I multiplied it by a half of a foot times 0.5. And that gave me 600. And that gave me 600 feet to the third power, and then divide that by 27. So I should have ordered 22 cubic yards of dirt. And instead, I only got 14 cubic yards of dirt. I don't know where I made the math mistake. So I was short and I had to have a second delivery. All right, a loan for 5% annual percentage rate, and it's interest only, is for $215,000. How much is the monthly interest payment? And this one is easy, but there's always simple mistakes that are made. And we're going to use our thing here as earnings, principal, and rate here again, or price and rate here again. And what we're looking for is the earnings. But remember, APR means annual percentage rate. So we're looking for the earnings, and that means we multiply the principal times the rate. So we're going to multiply 215,000 times 0.05, but that's per year because it's annual percentage rate. So 215,000 times 0.05 That gives us 10,750 a year. And it's asking you, what's the monthly interest rate? So we would divide that by 12. And that's $895.83. That's $895.83. And believe me, they will have a wrong answer that says 10,750 because they're hoping that you will forget to divide by 12.
Right.
Home is listed for 300,000. It's under contract for 290. The buyer is putting 10% down. The house appraised at 285. So this is a loan to value question, and it's doing a couple of things. First, it's making sure you can do math, but then it's making sure that you remember that the formula for loan to value is equal to the loan amount divided by the sales price or the appraised value, whichever is lower. So first of all, what's our loan amount? Well, the house is under contract for 290 and the buyer's putting down 10%. That means the loan amount is going to be 290 minus 29,000 because 10% of 290 is 29,000. So 290 minus 29,000, that gives us 261. That's our loan amount. And the house appraised at 285 and it's sold for 290. So we use the lower of those two. So we use the 285. And so our loan to value ratio is going to be 261 divided by 285. And that comes out to 92% if we round it off. Okay, that means if you had to put 10% down on this, if that's what you needed to put down, you would have to come up with extra money in order to be able to get this loan. All right, those are pretty representative questions for math for what's going to be on the test. We'll hit a couple others going forward, a couple a night going forward, so we don't have a whole night of math, except we'll do some extra math tomorrow night. Now we're just going to hit some vocabulary words. Some people are telling me that the vocabulary is one of the harder things on the test. I do understand that the test now has more word problems that require deeper thinking. Years ago, it wasn't that way. I guess they feel you guys are getting smarter all the time, so they're making the test a little bit harder all the time. But we're still getting people to pass it, so we will get you to pass. All right, an adjustable rate mortgage is a mortgage that the interest rate goes up or goes down, and what makes it go up or down is an index plus a margin. So you might have the cost of funds index plus 1%. So if the cost of fund index is 1%, you would pay 1 plus 1 or 2. If the cost of funds index went up to 2%, you would pay 2 plus 1 or 3. So an adjustable rate mortgage is a mortgage where the interest rate varies depending upon an index plus a margin. Amortization means that you're killing the principal over the life of the loan. A loan can be fully amortized, which means you kill all the principal over the life of the loan, and at the end you owe 0. It can also be partially amortized, which means you might have a loan that's a 30-year amortization, but after 5 years, there's a balloon due of all the remaining principal. So a loan that's fully amortized, by the time you're done, you owe 0. A loan that's partially amortized, you pay it for a certain number of years, and then you have to pay the rest of the principal back all at once. And that's a balloon mortgage. A couple of special things about a fully amortized fixed loan is that the payments are the same every month for the entire life of the loan. And there's a question often on the test that seems to be a trick question. And the question is, you borrowed $100,000. That was your original loan, $100,000, and your payment was $412 a month. How much interest did you pay over the life of the loan? when you say, wow, I don't have enough information to get that. Well, you do, because over the life of the loan, if this was your principal and interest every month and you're going to kill off your principal, you would pay 412 times 360. And that would be the total of all your principal and interest. That would be the total of all your principal and interest. So 412 times 360 is going to give you 148,320. And if you borrowed $100,000 originally, that means the amount of interest you paid was 48,320, because you paid back your 100,000, and that's the 100,000 that's in that 148, and all that's left is 48,320. That is a very common question on the test. And when you first see it, you're going to panic and think, I can't solve this unless I know the interest rate. But that's one of the characteristics of a fully amortized loan, is that the principal and interest payment are the same through all 360 payments. Now, they're not the same numbers, because in the beginning you pay mostly interest and very little principal, and at the end you pay mostly principal and very little interest. But the total of the principal and interest on a fixed, fully amortized loan is the same throughout the loan. An appraisal is done by an appraiser, and we talked about that in the chapter on appraising. An appraisal it's very important. It is an opinion of value. And again, remember, there's 3 methods to doing appraisals. There's the income approach, the comparable sales method, and the cost approach. We use the comparable sales method for houses in like a single family house. We use the cost approach for the church or for a unique building. And we use the income approach for apartment buildings or a strip mall or a factory that pays rent. So again, 3 methods of doing the appraisal. Assessed value is how much the municipality assesses your land, plus it assesses your improvements, and that's your assessed value. Now you take your assessed value and multiply it by your tax rate, and that gives you how much taxes you pay on your property. The assessed value is not necessarily equal to your market value. There is a number that's called the equalization ratio that converts your assessed value to market value. A buyer's agent is someone who is using a real estate agent, and that real estate agent is treating that buyer as a client. So if you're a buyer's agent, you have a fiduciary duty to their client. And if you are a buyer's agent, your customer is the seller. So a buyer's agent owes old car to the buyer, and all they owe to the seller is honesty. There's 2 kinds of closings. There's the closing of the mortgage, and that's where you agree to all the terms and conditions of those mortgage covenants. And then there's the closing of title. That's when the ownership of the property passes to you. I had a closing yesterday. The buyers didn't speak English. The attorney didn't speak Spanish. The buyers wanted everything explained to them. So I had to put one of my friends on the phone and translate everything for them. So again, the mortgage closing, you sign hundreds of documents, including a document that says, not hundreds, you sign 100 documents, including a document that says that anything that you made a mistake on, you'll correct, or if you forgot to sign something, you'll come back and sign it. The comparative market analysis is the way that you do the appraisal on a single family home. A comparative market analysis uses the principle of substitution. And in the comparable market analysis, we have 3 rules. Number 1 is never touch the subject. Number 2 is eye for eye, increase for inferior. And number 3 is S for S, subtract for superior. So in a comparative market analysis or a BPO, we are making adjustments. And again, we never touch the subject, and it's I for I and S for S. Contract can have contingencies, and that means there's a mechanism by which somebody can get out of the contract under certain circumstances. For instance, a mortgage contingency. If you get turned down for your mortgage, you can get out of the contract. An inspection contingency. If you do an inspection, and an inspection must be done by a licensed inspector, if you do an inspection and you find safety or health issues and the seller is refusing to fix them or refusing to credit you, you can get out of the deal based on the contingencies for the inspection. You might have a contingency to have the property delivered vacant. You're not going to close on it unless the tenant is removed. So there's all different kinds of contingencies. A dual agency is when a real estate agent has both the buyer and the seller as clients in a transaction. And when the dual agent has both the buyer and the seller as clients in the same transaction, the agent must have informed consent to dual agency signed by both sides. Equity is defined as the amount that you have in your home's value after any liens or mortgages are taken away. A home equity loan is when you've got a mortgage, but you've got some equity in your house after the mortgage, and now you're borrowing on that home equity. And typically that would put you in second position. So if you have a house that's worth $200,000 on this example in this slide, and you owe $150,000 on it, you have $50,000 in equity. A fixed rate mortgage is a mortgage where the rate is the same for the entire period of the loan. And we can have a fixed rate conventional loan or a fixed rate FHA loan. And we can have an adjustable rate FHA loan or an adjustable rate conventional loan or a fixed rate VA loan or a adjustable rate VA loan. It just depends on what kind of a loan that you're going to use to qualify for your purchase. And although I don't like adjustable rate loans, there is an advantage sometimes because there's a loan that is a 525, where for the first 5 years, the interest charged is the same, and then it adjusts every other year for the next 25 years. So if you're pretty sure you're only going to stay in your house for 5 years, you might get a very low interest rate to start with. Home warranty is a warranty that either the buyer or the seller can pay for. And that home warranty is an insurance on the appliances and sometimes your water lines or your drain lines. The thing that to know about a home warranty is that if you're going to offer a home warranty in a listing, you must make it clear who's going to pay for the home warranty. Interest is the cost of borrowing money. And again, the amount of principal times the interest rate gives you the amount of interest that's paid or the earnings that paid. And we're going to remember that little circle if we have these problems. And again, the circle is, the E up top, that's the earnings, the P is the principal, and the R is the rate. By the way, the P could also be the price of the house. The earnings could also be the commission that you're paid, and the R is the rate of commission, because basically it's the same type of question. A couple of things about interest. On your principal primary residence, your interest is tax deductible up to $1 million loan. And points are prepaid interest. Points are prepaid interest. A mortgage broker is an individual who is arranging for loans to be created, but he's not lending his own money. Instead, he's putting a borrower with a lender and getting paid a commission on it. Principal is the amount of money that you're going to earn interest on. Now, you see principal is spelled P-A-L. So principal is the amount of money. Money is your pal, P-A-L. Principal, P-R-I-N-C-I-P-L-E. Principal is the person who is your client. So different types of principals. Private mortgage insurance, PMI. Private means there's no government involved. Private mortgage insurance is what you have if you have a conventional loan and you put down less than 20%. PMI is an insurance payment that you'll make every month to a company like AIG, And in the event you default and the lender has to foreclose, that insurance premium that you've been paying will have a benefit that's going to be paid to the lender. So with PMI has to be paid out, it doesn't go to the homeowner. PMI goes to the lender in the event they have to foreclose. And again, typically it's 20% down or less than 20% down, you have to pay PMI, private mortgage insurance. Since we're talking about PMI here on a conventional loan, very important to know that on an FHA loan, you pay MIP. So on a FHA loan, you pay MIP, and on a conventional loan, you pay PMI, P being private. And remember, an FHA loan is a government backed loan, government insured loan. A realtor is a person who has joined the National Association of Realtors. You have to pay your dues to join, and you have to promise to obey a code of ethics. The American Land Title Association is the trade association for title insurance agents. And amortization, again, we hit once before, it's paying off your principal. It comes from the word that means death, you're killing off your principal. Annual percentage rate is the percentage of a loan as expressed by an index plus a margin. I'm sorry, annual percentage rate is the nominal interest rate on your loan that's required as part of Regulation Z in the Truth in Lending Act. Chain of title is you're buying it from the fifth buyer bought it from the fourth buyer bought it from the third buyer. So you've got a chain of the consecutive owners of a property. Sometimes there's a break in the chain of title. And if there's a break in the chain of title and you can't figure out how the fourth owner got it from the second owner, you can cure that break in the chain of title with a quitclaim deed or with a motion to quiet title. Who does a chain of title? A title searcher in preparation for your title insurance policy and your title search and your abstract of title. Closing statement is the accounting statement that's given for everything that happened at a closing. It shows debits and credits to each party. And the little system that we've kind of developed is anything that requires that wheelbarrow of money that the buyer has to bring to closing. Anything that requires that wheelbarrow full of money to have more in it is going to be a debit to the buyer. Anything that makes that wheelbarrow lighter is going to be a credit to the buyer. At closing, the seller is going to get a check. Anything that makes that check bigger is a credit to the seller. Anything that makes that check smaller is a debit to the seller. My favorite thing is the commission. And the commission makes the seller's check smaller. Therefore, the commission is a debit to the seller. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry about that. The one thing to remember about debits and credits is that on the closing statement, the sales price is always considered a credit to the seller, and the sales price is always considered a debit to the buyer. Okay, PMI is private mortgage insurance, and it's incurred when you have a conventional loan and you put down less than 20%. So if you're borrowing money on a conventional loan to buy a house and you're only putting down 10%, every month, besides your mortgage and your taxes, you're going to have to make an additional payment to the PMI company for PMI insurance. And then in the event the house gets foreclosed, the PMI insurer will make the lender whole again. Doesn't do you any good. It makes the lender whole again. And we have PMI on conventional loans. On an FHA loan, we have MIP, which does the same function. We just use different letters. It's MIP on an FHA loan. It's PMI on a conventional loan. All right, closing statement needs to be given to buyers and sellers at closing, and if they don't attend closing, as expeditiously as possible. The statement is supposed to be reviewed by the buyer and seller and get signed by the buyer and seller. A couple of tricky things on that closing statement. The new mortgage that the buyer is getting to buy the house, the new mortgage is going to be a credit to the buyer, because that new mortgage that's being wired in for him to buy the house makes his wheelbarrow full of money that's coming in lighter. Cloud on title is an irregularity or a possible claim or encumbrance on a title that might cause a problem sometimes in the future or even now. And again, if we have a cloud on title, we can typically cure a cloud on title with a quitclaim deed or with a motion to quiet title, very similar to a break in the chain of title. Covenant is a promise. We have mortgage covenants and we have covenants in deeds. In deeds, the one they bring up on the test all the time is the covenant of season. The covenant of season is where the grantor says, I am the owner, and I promise you I'm the owner. The one deed that does not have a covenant of season is a quitclaim deed. In a quitclaim deed, the grantor is not saying they're the owner. They're just saying they promise they'll never bring a claim against the property. A deed is a written document which transfer title or interest to real estate. For example, if you're selling a house, you're going to use a deed to transfer the ownership. If you're going to grant your neighbor an easement, you would do that with a deed. So it conveys a right or an interest or title from one party to another. And again, a deed must have delivery and acceptance and the here and now, and must have a competent grantor. Default is failure to perform a promised task or to pay an obligation when due, or to not do what you were supposed to do on a contract. Also, it can be called breach of contract, and we have remedies for breach. If a seller breaches a contract, the very first remedy is rescission. That's a return to the status quo. The second remedy is to sue for compensatory damages. And the third remedy is to sue for specific performance. If a buyer defaults on a contract, the first remedy is rescission. We do not have liquidated damages in New Jersey, but liquidated damages is an agreed to amount that would be forfeit if the buyer defaults or breaches, but we don't typically have that in New Jersey unless it's a builder. The next remedy is compensatory damages, and the most severe remedy is specific performance. The question on the test often comes up for default, what's the least desired remedy? And the least desired remedy is rescission, because that means you pretend it never even happened. And that means you don't get any damages. So rescission is the least desired remedy. A defect is a blemish, imperfection, or deficiency, and we see that in title, if there's a cloud on title or if there's something wrong with title. And again, if there was something wrong with title, title insurance would not issue a title insurance policy because title insurance only covers unknown defects. So the title insurance company does a search and they find the defects they need to find. If there's no defects, then they give you an insurance policy. If they find a defect, they don't give you an insurance policy. So a blemish, infection, or deficiency, defective title is one that is regular, irregular, and faulty. Depreciation. In this particular case, depreciation is part of the cost approach, because the step in the cost approach after you build your imaginary building in your brain is to apply accrued depreciation. And accrued depreciation is wear and tear, functional obsolescence, and external obsolescence. And those are factors in the cost approach for appraising. What would we use the cost approach on? A church or a government building or a historic or very unique building. Earnest money is the amount of money the buyer puts down on a property, but the earnest money itself does not count as the down payment, because the earnest money itself is the buyer's money and it becomes part of the down payment at closing. If you're a buyer and you put down earnest money and you're under contract. So we're gonna say you got through attorney review and you're under contract and the deal falls apart. Before the earnest money can be returned, both sides, the seller and the buyer, have to agree that it's going to be returned. Just because the buyer wants it back doesn't mean it goes back to the buyer. Just because the seller wants it for compensatory damages doesn't mean it goes to the seller. An easement is the right by one person to enjoy or to make limited use of another's real property. We talked about my building in Highland Park and the next door neighbor, where the next door neighbor has the permanent right to cross over my driveway. That's an easement. And that is specifically an easement appurtenant. And the easement appurtenant is said to run with the land. So if I sold my house in Highland Park, the new owner would still be bound by that same easement. If my next door neighbor sold his house, the new buyer would still benefit from the easement. The one who benefits from the easement, in this case, my next door neighbor, is known as the dominant estate. The one who is bound and reduces their rights on their property, which is my case, is called the servient estate. We do have another kind of an easement that's known as an easement in gross. An easement in gross is like the high tension wires passing over your property. And by the way, tonight in the news, there was an easement in gross for an underground gas pipeline from Pennsylvania to Linden. And today, through some political pressures, it was dropped. And part of the reason it was dropped was that easement, that pipeline needed a lot of easements in gross to get underneath people's properties from Linden to Pennsylvania. And so they just didn't want to have to deal with the legal battle for those easements in gross to be created by eminent domain through the process of condemnation. So you'll see that in the news tonight, that they dropped the pipeline that was going to bring natural gas from Pennsylvania to New Jersey. Egress is the right to leave a property or to go over a property. And again, when you grant someone an easement, you grant them the right of ingress and egress. You let them use your property to come in and come out of. Eminent domain, and we just talked about that a second ago, is the right of the government to take your property. Eminent domain means for the good of the kingdom, and they must pay reasonable value for it. They take your property through the process of condemnation. When they take your property, they need to pay you fair market value. If they take just part of your property, they must pay you severance damages, and they determine the severance damages by the before and after method. And sometimes the government can do something, perhaps close an exit ramp on a highway that makes your property not worth anything. And that's called inverse condemnation. And they must pay you for the loss in value that your property incurred from something they did. Encroachment is when part of your structure, part of the physicalities of your property goes onto your neighbor's land, or your neighbor's property comes onto your land. And the problem with an encroachment is it creates the possibility of an adverse possession claim somewhere down in the future. So, for instance, if a title insurance policy is doing a title search accompanied with a survey, and they find out your neighbor's fence is on your property, they won't give you title insurance because that's a defect. You would have to move your neighbor's fence off your property before they would get title insurance. An encumbrance is a claim, a right, or a lien upon the title to real estate. Think of the picture of the donkey holding the backpack. That backpack is an encumbrance. The donkey is the lien. So anything a lien carries that makes it heavier, like a lease, like an easement, like a deed restriction, like a defeasible fee, like a lien. And all liens are financial claims. The other kind of liens are what we call use encumbrances. An endorsement is an addition to or modification to the title insurance policy that expands the coverages or fulfills specific requirements of the insured, maybe that the lender has placed on them. So you get an endorsement on a title insurance policy. An exception is things that are on a title insurance policy that are not covering. The most notable exception and exclusion on a title insurance policy is they never cover eminent domain. So if they're taking your property through the right of eminent domain and the process of condemnation, your title insurance company will not get involved. Fee simple is the highest form of ownership, also known as fee simple absolute. It is a freehold form of ownership. The other freehold forms are defeasible fee and life estate. And the significant characteristics of fee simple, defeasible fee, and life estate is that you have all of the bundle of rights for an indefinite period of time. And that makes it a freehold estate, which is the opposite of a leasehold estate, where all you have is the right of possession out of the bundle of rights, and you only have that right of possession for a definite period of time. And that definite period of time is your lease. So freehold is the whole bundle of rights for indefinite. Leasehold is you're borrowing the right of possession for a definite period of time. First mortgage is the one that is recorded first, said to have priority. It serves as the number one mortgage, which means it's the first one that gets paid off in the event of a foreclosure. And then any second or third mortgages only get paid if there's money left. A unique characteristic in New Jersey is that unpaid municipal taxes automatically jump to first position, even if the lender's time and date of recording is earlier. Automatic jumps to first position for unpaid municipal taxes. Foreclosure is the process by which the lender, using the mortgage, takes your property back. And New Jersey is a judicial foreclosure state, which means you have to get in front of a judge. And the way you get in front of a judge is with a lis pendens, a lis pendens. We also are a strict foreclosure state. So there's a very strict set of rules. It takes about 4 to 5 years to foreclose in New Jersey. A general warranty deed is a deed or other written instrument containing all the common law items of a warranty. It's also known as a full warranty deed, and we do not use those very often in New Jersey, because in a general warranty or a full warranty, you're making all the promises. The grantor is making all the promises to the grantee that no matter what happens from now till ever, that the grantor will correct them in terms of ownership or encumbrances on the ownership of the property. Instead, in New Jersey, we use a special warranty deed. Another term for a special warranty deed is a bargain and sale with covenants against grantor's acts deed. So that's a special warranty deed, bargain and sale with covenants against grantor's acts. And that kind of a deed, coupled with title insurance, gives us evidence of marketable title. Hazard insurance is insurance that you get in the event that your property burns down, and your lender is always the first insured on the hazard insurance. And remember, part of real estate commission rules say that if you're providing hazard insurance as part of your services, there must be written affirmation that that policy is in effect 5 days before closing. An heir is somebody who inherits under the provisions of a will, and that's called a devise. Some things are herediments, and that means they're able to be inherited. And we know, for instance, that a life estate, if you are a life tenant, cannot be inherited because when you die, your right or interest goes away. So a life estate is not a hereditament. And we know that ownership as tenants, joint tenants with rights of survivorship, is not a hereditament, because if there's 3 owners and one dies, his share goes to his co-owners, not to his heirs. Ingress is the opposite of egress. It's the right to enter a property for the purpose of leaving a property. Intestate means dying without a will. So if you die without a will, but you do have heirs, then the New Jersey law of intestate distribution defines who's getting what of your property. If you die without a will and you also don't have any heirs, then the state of New Jersey gets your property through escheat, and they don't pay for it because they don't know who to pay. So that's if you die with no will and no heirs. Dying testate means you had a will. If you die testate, you have an executor appointed in your will. If you die intestate, you have an administrator appointed by the probate court. Joint tenants with rights of survivorship means you have more than one owner, but the owners that you have the four unities, the unities of time, title, possession, and interest. And that means that it also does not have a right of survivorship. So if you have three owners and one dies, the dead guy's share, his 33%, goes to the other two surviving owners. It does not go to the dead guy's heirs. A judgment is the conclusion of a trial or a court case, and it is the awarding of money. A judgment creates a general lien. That means it's a lien against all your property, and a judgment creates an involuntary lien. So a judgment lien is an involuntary general lien. A lien is a liability or claim against a property, such as a mortgage. A mortgage is a voluntary specific lien. Could be a mechanic's lien. That's where a contractor does work on your house. And that is an involuntary specific lien. Or it could be a judgment. That's an involuntary general lien. List pendants is a pending lawsuit. That's the first notice that's public record that there's going to be a foreclosure. And we are a judicial state, which means you have to get in front of a judge. And the list pendants is kind of like your ticket to get in front of the judge, the lender's ticket to get in front of the judge. A loan estimate is a 3-page document that's provided to borrowers no later than 3 days, 3 business days. Those business days, in this case, do include Saturday, after they submit a loan application. And it provides information about the features of the loan. Marketable title is any title that will have an insurance company write a title insurance policy on. It's also known as mercantile title. And it's funny that I pronounce it that way, but my son had a teacher in school that mercantilism was something they studied, and that's the way they insisted on pronouncing it. So that's in honor of that teacher from 8th grade or whatever it was. Mechanic's lien is a lien if a contractor does work on your property and you don't pay them. They have the ability to, within 30 days of the final material being delivered, it's 90 days of the final materials being delivered or the final work being done, to file a mechanic's lien. It's an involuntary specific lien. Its priority is determined by time and date of recording. So it means if you have a mortgage on your house, that's the first mortgage. Now you file a mechanic's lien, it's going to be in second position. Meets and bounds is what we use for the legal description that a surveyor does. Meets and bounds means distance and direction. We have a point of beginning and a point of ending. We can have benchmarks and monuments. We go around the perimeter of your property in a clockwise direction using that distance and direction. And this serves as a legal description, and it must accompany a mortgage, and it must accompany a deed in New Jersey. Owner's policy is the kind of title insurance you get when you buy a property. The owner's policy, also known as a fee policy, and the owner's policy covers the buyer and the buyer's heirs, and it only covers unknown defects. It doesn't cover known defects. Only an owner's policy protects the buyer should a covered title problem arise with the title that was not found. So it means unknown. Power of attorney is when you allow someone else to sign a document on your behalf and it legally obligates you to that document. So you grant power of attorney to someone who becomes, and their legal capacity is your attorney in fact. So if I were to give my wife power of attorney, she would sign documents, Lee Parker as attorney in fact for Bruce Parker. And whatever she signed that way would obligate me to the contract. Now, if I gave my wife power of attorney, that power of attorney could be terminated by me revoking it. It could be terminated by lapse of time. It could be terminated by accomplishment of the objective. It could be terminated by me dying, and it could be terminated by her dying, and it could be terminated by her saying she didn't want to do it anymore. So that's power of attorney. By the way, in power,
Bruce?
yes. Mhm.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That power of attorney, would, if, let's say you were a broker to a principal and he gave you a power of attorney and he went away. That was a question. I just wanted
Yep.
to double check if I got it
That
again on the.
Broker is not allowed to do that. A
So the
broker is,
broker is not allowed to have.
nope. An
power of
attorney could have power of attorney, but not the broker. And that's because the broker is, has a less than arm's length interest and a vested interest. So the broker is not allowed to have power of attorney to sign for contracts or closing documents. An attorney can, or a person other than the broker can be appointed as power of attorney, but not the broker. And that's a question that's always on the test.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Bruce. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Preliminary title report is when they first do their title search. They use that preliminary title report to then do a chain of title, and then they do an abstract of title. The abstract of title is a written report of everything they found. Promissory note is an IOU. When you borrow money to buy a house, you give the lender the mortgage that allows the lender to take the house back from you, and you give the lender a promissory note. What the promissory note does, it allows the lender to sue you if they lose money when they take the house back, and they sue you for what's called a deficiency judgment. Quiet title suit is a lawsuit that can solve or cure a cloud on title or a break in the chain of title. Quitclaim deed is a deed that does not have a covenant of season and is merely a way in which the grantor says, I will never bring a claim against your property. But it doesn't say that the grantor has any claim to the property. He's just saying he promises he will never bring a claim. So a quitclaim deed does not have a covenant of season. So again, a deed that does not imply the grantor holds title. Riparian rights are the rights that have to do with flowing water. Think of ripples on a stream. We also have littoral rights. Littoral rights have to do with larger bodies of water that are affected by the tidal currents. Littoral rights, think of litter on the beach. So riparian rights are ripples on a stream. Littoral rights are litter on the beach or litter on a lakefront, larger bodies of water. Title search is an examination of all the public records. Where do they do that? At the county clerk's office. And it relates to all the things that have been recorded that affect that property and the chain of title. The sixth owner got it from the fifth owner got it from the fourth owner got it from the third owner. A second mortgage is one that is recorded at a later date than the first mortgage. The second mortgage has second priority. It's in a junior position. And in the event of a foreclosure, the first mortgage gets paid off in full, and the second mortgage only gets paid off for what's left. A special warranty deed is the deed we use in New Jersey in normal transactions. It's also called a bargain and sale with covenants against grantor's acts. This kind of a deed, coupled with title insurance, gives us what we call good and marketable title. Subdivision is when you take a piece of property and divide it into two pieces. That would be a minor subdivision. And a minor subdivision does not need an environmental impact statement. if you take a piece of property and you divide it into 100 pieces, that's a major subdivision. And you're going to need an environmental impact statement on that. Again, a survey is done by a surveyor using a meets and bounds definition. And the purpose of it is to define where your property is and find out if there's any encroachments. A tax lien. So we have this question a couple of times. Can the federal government charge real estate taxes? The answer is no. Can the state of New Jersey charge real estate taxes? The answer is no. Who charges real estate taxes? The municipality. And the municipalities need the money. So if you don't pay your taxes, every year, every municipality has a tax lien auction, and they let investors pay your taxes for you. When the investors pay your taxes for you, that creates a tax lien. If the investors hold that tax lien for 2 years, they can foreclose. If nobody bids on the tax lien and the town gets it back, then the town is said to hold that in rem. And if the town is holding a tax lien in rem, they only have to hold it for 2 months. I'm sorry, they only have to hold it for 6 months before they can redeem. So in rem, you only have to hold it for 6 months, a normal tax lien, 2 years. By the way, somebody asked earlier, can you get a list of stuff from the county clerk's office? And I'm working on both Middlesex and Monmouth County now. I'm working on how to get the probate lists. I'm working how to get the tax lien lists. I'm working how to get the list pendants list. And each county has some things it's easier to get than the other, and something that it's much harder to get than the other. So again, if I ever solve this all, I'll let you guys know, because there's absolutely gold in that information. There will be a lot of foreclosures coming up when they finally end the moratorium on evictions and the moratorium on foreclosures and the forbearance on people paying their loans. Tenancy by the entireties means husband and wife, and it's a method of ownership that's when you're married. It creates an automatic life estate upon the other spouse. And again, the only way you can remove tenants by the entirety is by death of one of the spouses or by divorce. A wife can't sell her tenants by the entirety. A husband can't force the wife to give up her tenants by the entirety, only by death or divorce. A tenant is somebody who holds the right of possession under a lease. And remember, the right of possession is called a reversionary interest because the right of possession goes back to the landlord at the end of a lease. Another word for a lease is also a demise. And remember, I said that that word demise means a lease. The word devise means to inherit something. And those are always together on the tests because they sound alike. Tenants in common is when there is more than one ownership on a property, and a tenants in common has equal rights of possession. All the owners have the rights to go on any part of the property they want. Tenants in common is a hereditament. So if there's 3 of us owning a property as tenants in common and I die, my share can go to my heirs. Why would I want to have a joint tenancy with rights of survivorship if it is not a hereditament? Well, one of the reasons is tenancy in common, you have to go through probate if somebody dies. Joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, you avoid probate. So that's the advantage of joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, is that you avoid probate. Title commitment is after the title does its title search and creates its abstract of title and its chain of title. The underwriters for the title insurance company look it over and make sure there's nothing on there that they see it will create a problem. Then they will issue a title commitment. The title commitment means that they promise you by the contract that they will issue you a title insurance policy when your deal closes, when your property closes. Title covenants are promises that you make within the deed itself. And again, we have the different covenants are the covenants against encumbrances, the covenants of further assurance, the covenant of a good right and authority to convey, the covenant of quiet enjoyment, the covenant of season. And again, a quitclaim deed does not have a covenant of season, and the covenant of warranty. Different, and covenants means promises, by the way. Title defect is if there's something wrong in your title that might affect the chain of title or might not allow it to have a title insurance policy issued on it. Title examination is what's done by the underwriters to make sure that they're willing to issue an insurance policy on it. Again, title insurance is a one-time fee. You pay it when you buy. Title insurance covers the buyer and the buyer's heirs, and it covers up to purchase price. And that's called a fee policy, FEE. Sometimes you will need to get a lender's policy. For instance, my parents purchased their house for $9,000. Their title insurance covered them for $9,000. When they passed away and myself and my siblings inherited the house, it covered us because we're heirs, but it only covered for $9,000. So if we wanted to refinance the house, the lender would probably want us to get a lender's title policy and increase our coverage up to the amount of money that we were refinancing. Okay, a title search is done by a title searcher, and he goes to the county clerk's office and looks up what's recorded. An underwriter is the person in the title insurance company or in a mortgage company or in a homeowner's insurance company that looks at all the documents and decides whether or not it is a risk that they're willing to take, whether it's the risk of issuing insurance, the risk of lending money. An acceleration clause is a clause in a mortgage that would, instead of having 30 years to pay it off, you have to pay it off all at once. You could have an alienation clause. That means if it changes hands, that you have to pay it off. That's a type of acceleration clause. You might have a due on sale clause. That's a type of acceleration clause. You have a clause that says you'll promise to pay taxes. If you don't, they can accelerate your loan. You have a clause in your mortgage that says that you will keep your property in good repair. If you don't, that can accelerate your loan. And a covenant in your mortgage that says that you will keep the property insured. If you don't, they can accelerate your loan. And there could be other things that accelerate your loan. You don't have a job. In some loans, it says it accelerates your loan if you lose your job. Accretion is the gradual buildup of sand and silt that creates more land, like the Gulf of Mexico and the Mississippi River. That's accretion. Reliction is when you pump out water and what's left is land. That's how they made the meadowlands. They pumped out a swamp and a lake and what's left is land. Avulsion is when you have a change in the flow of a river that defines a boundary due to an earthquake or a flood. And when the river goes back to its normal course, then the property boundary lines go back to their original normal course. An addendum is a change or an addition to a real estate contract. And there's a lot of weird things about addendums. For instance, an addendum technically triggers another attorney review period because you're making a change to the contract. Sometimes people don't understand that. An adjustable rate mortgage, we went over a couple of times. One of the things to remember in an adjustable rate mortgage, sometimes you may have negative amortization because an adjustable rate mortgage might have a payment cap. So if it adjusts, I was watching the Golden Girls the other day, and that's because I'm old. And when I'm watching the Golden Girls the other day, it was the very first episode. And they were all going to move into Blanche's house. And somebody said to Blanche, why don't you sell your house, take all the money and go do something else? And Blanche said, I have a 7% mortgage. Why would I ever think of selling my house and paying off a 7% mortgage? So again, it was funny because we're at 3% mortgages now, but you might have a mortgage that has a payment cap. And so inflation causes the mortgages to jump up. The amount you have to pay every month gets stopped by the payment cap, but the lender doesn't let you get away with that money. Instead, they add it back on to the principal. So then it's a negative amortization potential loan. Transaction, Ahmed asked, does a transaction broker need to hold a real estate license? Yes, he does. Why? Because that's the law. But he doesn't have any fiduciary duty to either party. He is just being able to be paid a commission for doing a real estate related activity for another. So actually, it's a thoughtful question, but the law says that a transaction broker needs a real estate license. Real estate investment trust is like a mutual fund for real estate. Couple of the things is it needs to have 100 shareholders. 75% of its assets have to be in real estate or in not active type investing, so you can't use it for flipping. And the big thing is that 90% of its annual income has to be distributed every year as profits. So you don't have any compounding of your income. No fewer than 5 people can own 50% of the real estate investment trust. Most shopping centers are owned by real estate investment trusts. A reverse mortgage is for senior citizens, 59 and a half or older. And when we talk about loans, we talk about the front end ratio. Front end ratio is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance divided by income. Problem is, senior citizens don't have income. So how do they get a loan? Well, on these reverse mortgages, which are FHA products, a senior citizen can get a loan just on the loan to value ratio. Their income doesn't matter. Their credit doesn't matter. Just their loan to value matters. And on a reverse mortgage, you don't make payments on it until you die or until you move out of the house or sell the house. So, you're a senior citizen and you've got a $500,000 house, you've got it paid off and you don't have any income. You can borrow, let's say, half of that, $250,000, and you never have to pay it back until you die or until you move out or until you sell the house. So it allows you to use your equity in the house. Special assessment is something that acts similar to taxes. Might be something like putting in a sewer line on your property. And that special assessment jumps to first position, just like unpaid taxes. Typically, they're going to give you a number of years to pay it off. And when you get your license and you're doing your job, when you take a listing, you want to make sure there's no special assessments. Because if you've got a special assessment where the work has already been done, so it's increased the value of the property, but the assessment still has 4 years of payments left, who's going to pay those 4 years of payments? Something that you've got to make sure you address. Why does it take so long to close? Under normal circumstances, it takes about 2 months to close. So you take up about a week in attorney review. You take out up 2 weeks in home inspections. So now you've already gone through 3 weeks. Then the buyer will apply for their mortgage. Then the lender wants all this documentation and paperwork. And the lender does have responsibility to confirm everything that you've put in your uniform residential loan application, like where you work, how long you've been there, how much you made. And by the way, your employer now, it's a crime for them to not give the truth, right? You can't call your boss up one day and say, hey, please tell him I've been here 10 years when you've only been there a year, because that's a crime for your boss to do that. So now they yes.
I'm sorry, Bruce, I apologize. I meant to say foreclose, not close. I meant to put foreclose. Why does it take so long to foreclose?
Because it's a judicial process in New Jersey, there's a requirement that you have to let any other lien holders know. You have to publish that information and do the research. Then there's some periods that give the homeowner timeframes to cure the defect, to pay everything they owe. And then there's a getting in front of the judge for the lis pendens. And a bunch of other legal processes. So it ends up taking 4 to 5 years. Now, there are states like Florida and California, they close in very, very quickly. But that's because we are a lien theory state where you get the deed with liens on it. In the title theory states, in the states that are title theory states, you don't get your deed until you pay off the entire amount. And so it's much easier for the lender to get the title back because it never really went to the homeowner. So that's the best explanation I can give you quickly.
Thank you.
Okay. Again, a special assessment acts as just like taxes, jumps to a senior position. Realty transfer tax is paid by the seller, and the realty transfer tax is a debit on the seller's closing statement. It's a sliding scale. The more you pay for a house, the higher the percentage of the tax. And there is a 1% millionaire's tax. If a house sells for $1 million or more, there's an extra 1% that's charged for what they call the millionaire's tax. Now, the realty transfer tax is always paid for by the seller. The millionaire's tax, it's by negotiation who pays the millionaire's tax. Triple net lease is the kind of lease you use in commercial leases. Usually, a triple net lease has a flat fee, plus net 1 is for taxes, net 2 is for insurance, net 3 is for common area charges. You can also have a single net lease or a double net lease, but the first net is always taxes. And that's as opposed to a gross lease. In a gross lease, you just make one payment a month. You don't pay a portion of the taxes. Your landlord takes your rent and applies it to his taxes however he wants. In a net lease or a triple net lease, you're making a flat fee payment plus you're paying your share of the taxes. The purpose of a triple net lease, and we talked about this when we did the chapter on appraisals, is in our value by income. Our net operating income is our rent minus our expenses. Our expenses are, for one of the parts, your taxes. So if your taxes go up, that decreases your net operating income. And if you decrease your net operating income, it decreases your value. So how does the landlord make sure that if the taxes go up, he gets more money? He has a net lease. So it's a flat fee plus the taxes. So if the taxes go up, the tenant just pays more taxes. And that keeps the landlord's value just as high. Timeshare is a form of ownership where you own a one week or 1 month. There's timeshares now that are for 1/8 of a year. In a timeshare, it's also known as interval ownership or vacation ownership. A timeshare can be deeded, which means you would have the same unit every year. And these 1/8 timeshares are for luxury homes. And you do, of course, have the same house every year. A leasehold timeshare is you're just going to get a week anywhere in the complex. Under the Timeshare Act, there's an exception that allows somebody who refers somebody to buy a property that's a timeshare. It allows them to be paid a referral fee, even though they're not licensed. Otherwise, in order to be paid a fee for any real estate related activity, you have to have a license. Truth in Lending Act was part of the Consumer Protection Act of 1968. The biggest thing on it is it requires Regulation Z. The biggest thing about Regulation Z is it requires a statement of the annual percentage rate. And the annual percentage rate is the interest rate you're going to pay plus the cost of originating the loan. So you might be getting a 3% interest rate, but your APR is going to show as 3.5 because your cost of originating the loan added up to another 0.5. The purpose of the Truth in Lending Act is to allow borrowers to understand the full cost of borrowing and for lenders to not do bait and switch. It allows borrowers to understand the full cost of borrowing and not to allow lenders to do bait and switch. VA loans are a type of loan that's available to eligible veterans who have been honorably discharged. And these veterans are allowed to get a VA loan at 0% down. At 0% down, the limits are relatively low, about $400,000. In order to qualify for a VA loan, if you've been discharged, you go to your local Veterans Administration and you get a certificate of eligibility. You go to a regular bank to get a VA loan. The interest rates are market rates. There's no benefit for a VA loan in terms of rates. One of the important things about a VA loan is the loan is always accompanied with a CRV, which is a certificate of reasonable value. Because if the house doesn't appraise, the veteran doesn't have to buy it. There's no mortgage insurance. So you're putting 0 down and not paying that PMI or MIP. And those PMI or MIPs can be very expensive. So a VA loan is a really good deal. An important function of VA loans is they're also assumable. And in order to assume a VA loan, you don't have to be a veteran. You just have to be an owner occupant. Zoning variances, or if you're trying to do something that is against the zoning on a particular piece of property you own, whether it's an undersized lot or whether it's a use variance, you'll go before your planning board and you'll make an application for a zone variance at a public hearing. If you get turned down for the variance, you're going to appeal. And if you get turned down for the appeal, you're going to go for an amendment. Sale leaseback is a financing arrangement where the seller becomes the tenant and the buyer becomes the landlord. The purpose of a sale leaseback is perhaps the seller has fully depreciated the building and no longer gets that tax advantage. And now when he sells it and he pays rent, rent is expensable, which means he can expense it against income. And also he gets liquid. So he's got a lot of money. So maybe if he's selling his factory, he can redo his factory and put automation in. Today on Bloomberg, they were talking about, we have in the United States now less than 5% of all jobs automated. That's a much lower percentage than they thought would have happened by this time. Real property is defined as the land that God gave us, to the center of the earth below, to the heavens above, and all things attached by man or nature, including your bundle of rights. A mobile home is delivered on 2 wheels or 4 wheels to a piece of property. It has a motor vehicle identification number. When it is permanently attached to the pad site, it becomes real property. Except it always has that vehicle identification number, and the blue laws in New Jersey say that mobile homes cannot be sold on Sundays. An installment contract or a land contract or a contract for deed is where you agree to pay the purchase price, but the seller doesn't give you title until you pay them all the money you owe. That's an installment contract, a land contract, or a contract for deed. One of the worst ways to borrow money, because you miss one payment and you lose everything. A ground lease is a type of a lease where you lease the land and you build your own building on it. And I use the example of the Walmart on Spring Valley Road. A company known as South Brunswick Golf owns the land. They lease it to Walmart. Walmart builds their own building and they own the building. And at the end of the lease, Walmart has to take the building down. Now, there is a gigantic thing going on in China now, where one of the biggest real estate firms and lending firms in China is about to go bankrupt. It's going to have big ramifications. One of the big things about real estate in China is you don't own the land. You get, and I didn't know this until today, I didn't know how long the period was. When you buy a house in China, you get a 77-year lease. The government owns all the land. So almost all the real estate in China is ground leases, where you build your own building and the government owns the land. I don't know what's going to happen at the end of 77 years because China, the Communist Party there hasn't had that long of a history to say what's going to happen at the end of 77 years. Ginnie Mae is part of the secondary market. Ginnie Mae, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac are the secondary market. The purpose of the secondary market is to assure liquidity. So why is liquidity important? Because in the economic concept of value, what gives something value is demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. And in demand, you've got the desire to have something accompanied with the availability of capital. So availability of capital means liquidity. So Ginnie Mae, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac are all there, so we have liquidity. Because if we don't have liquidity, we don't have capital available, we don't have demand. If demand goes down, value goes down. That's what happened in 2008. Ginnie Mae, again, is government. That's what the G stands for. Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae were shareholder owned, but they are still under government conservatorship. And the three of them are known as the secondary market. An FHA loan is a loan that requires as little as a 3.5% down payment. If you get an FHA loan, you're going to pay MIP, mortgage insurance premiums. Those mortgage insurance premiums will make the lender whole again if you default. FHA is part of HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And an FHA loan is a government insured loan. A VA loan is a government guaranteed loan. Fiduciary duty is what you have towards your client. If you are somebody's agent, you have a fiduciary duty to them. The fiduciary duty is old car: obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accountability, and reasonable care and diligence. All right, so that's where we're going to end tonight. I will do a few more math questions tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. What I'm going to try to do is prepare them for you tonight and email the math questions to everybody. I would prefer that you try to solve these few simple math questions on your own before we go over them. Because me just telling you how to do them, it doesn't sink into your head. So I will get you guys some math questions between now and tomorrow, let's say at lunchtime. And then we'll start class at 7 tomorrow night. And it's not a mandatory class. It's only if you want to come. And then we'll check your answers and go over them. But I need you to feel the pain. Not going to give you a lot of them, but we'll give you, 10 or 15 problems to do. And then we'll go over them tomorrow night. If anybody has any special questions tomorrow night, who's taking the test on Friday, ask me tomorrow. And we'll go over them tomorrow night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Bruce. Thank you.
All right. So we'll see you guys tomorrow. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.